She's a genius.
Wow, thank you. Oh my goodness.
Ta-da!
Wow. Look at that, everyone.
The evening sky was covered with thick gray clouds as light rain tapped softly against the windows of the old community arts center. Most people had already gone home. The classrooms were empty, the long hallway was quiet, and only a few lights remained on. The building always became peaceful after sunset. For some people, the silence felt lonely. For her, it felt safe. She arrived carrying a worn piano bag that held nothing more than a notebook, a small bottle of water, and sheets of music that had been folded and unfolded countless times. She greeted the security guard with a warm smile before signing her name in the visitor book, just as she had done for years. "You came again," the guard said with a smile. She nodded. "Just for a little practice." He laughed softly. "You always say that. Then 2 hours pass before I even notice." She smiled but said nothing more. She preferred quiet conversations. She never wanted people asking too many questions about her or her music. The practice room was at the end of the hallway. Inside stood an old grand piano that had seen better days. Its wooden surface showed tiny scratches, and its polished finish had faded with time. Many students preferred the newer instruments upstairs, saying this piano no longer sounded as rich as it once had. She never complained. To her, every piano had a story. Every key had feelings waiting to be discovered. She gently placed her hand on the lid before opening it, almost like greeting an old friend. Before playing, she always sat quietly for a few minutes. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and listened to the silence around her. It helped her leave behind the worries of the day. Her life looked ordinary from the outside. She worked long hours at a neighborhood bookstore, arranging shelves, helping customers, and wrapping gifts during busy weekends. Most people who visited the shop only knew her as the polite employee who always recommended good books with a kind smile. No one imagined that every evening, after work, she hurried across town to spend hours practicing piano. Years earlier, she had dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. But one painful day had changed everything. During a public performance when she was much younger, fear suddenly took over. Her hands became cold. She forgot part of the music. She stopped playing in the middle of the piece. The silence that followed stayed in her heart for years. Some people in the audience whispered. Others looked away. Although no one shouted at her, she believed she had disappointed everyone who believed in her. That moment became a wall she could never fully climb over. She stopped performing. She stopped entering competitions. She stopped telling people she loved music. But she never stopped practicing. Instead of giving up, she quietly promised herself that she would keep playing, even if nobody ever listened again. Every evening became another chance to improve. One note, one page, one song, little by little, month after month, year after year. She never chased applause anymore. She simply wanted to become better than she had been yesterday. The old piano understood her quiet promise. She placed the first sheet of music on the stand. Outside, the rain became heavier. Inside, the building remained still. Her fingers rested gently above the keys. Then she played. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. The melody slowly floated through the empty room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It sounded honest. Every note carried calm, patience, and quiet hope. She wasn't thinking about perfect technique. She wasn't imagining a large audience. She simply allowed her heart to speak through the music. Far down the hallway, the security guard paused while drinking tea. He lifted his head. The music reached him like a gentle breeze. "I've never heard it sound like that before," he quietly said to himself. At the same time, a cleaning worker pushing a small cart stopped outside another classroom. She smiled without realizing it. The melody reminded her of evenings from many years ago when her grandmother used to hum peaceful songs while preparing dinner. Without thinking, she leaned against the wall and listened. On the second floor, a young music student who had forgotten a notebook returned to the building. As soon as the student entered the hallway, the sound drifted upstairs. Curious, the student slowly followed it. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Inside the practice room, she continued playing. The music slowly became stronger. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence built over countless quiet evenings. Every difficult passage felt effortless. Every gentle moment carried deep emotion. The old piano seemed different tonight. Its sound became warm and full, filling every corner of the building. It was almost impossible to believe this was the same instrument many people had ignored for years. The security guard quietly walked closer. The cleaning worker stood beside the doorway. The student remained several steps behind them. None of them entered the room. They simply listened. The melody continued growing. It rose like sunlight after a long storm, carried memories of loss, carried hope that never disappeared. It carried quiet courage that words could never fully explain. The security guard felt his eyes become wet. He quickly wiped them before anyone noticed. "I don't even know why this music is affecting me," he whispered. The cleaning worker smiled gently. "Sometimes beautiful music says things people cannot." Inside the room, she had no idea anyone was listening. Her eyes remained focused on the keyboard. Nothing else existed. No fear. No memories of failure. No audience. Only music. The student carefully reached into a pocket and pulled out a phone. For a moment, the student hesitated. Recording someone without disturbing them didn't feel wrong because the door remained open, and the performance felt too special to disappear forever. The phone began recording. Only a short video. No talking. No movement. Just the music. Several minutes passed. The melody slowly became quieter again. The final notes floated gently into the silence. Her hands rested on the keys for a few seconds before lifting away. She closed her eyes and smiled softly. For the first time in many years, she felt completely at peace. She believed it had been another ordinary practice. Nothing more. She stood, organized her music sheets, and carefully closed the piano. When she turned around, she froze for a second. The security guard smiled first. The cleaning worker softly clapped. The student lowered the phone, looking almost embarrassed. I'm sorry," the student said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." She looked surprised. "I didn't even know anyone was here." The security guard laughed kindly. "That's because you were somewhere else." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You were inside the music." She didn't know how to answer. Compliments always made her uncomfortable. "I'm still learning," she quietly replied. The cleaning worker smiled. "We all are." The student hesitated before speaking again. "I've practiced piano for 6 years." She nodded politely. "I wish I could play with even half the feeling you have." She shook her head. "Feeling comes from living. The notes are only part of the story." The three listeners looked at each other. None of them expected such simple words. She picked up her bag. "It was nice talking with all of you." She thanked them, wished everyone a peaceful night, and quietly walked toward the exit. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. The streets reflected the glow of the streetlights as she slowly walked home, completely unaware that anything unusual had happened. Behind her, the student looked once more at the short recording. "It would be a shame if nobody ever heard this," the student whispered. After thinking for a moment, the student uploaded the short clip with only a simple sentence. "An ordinary evening practice at our community arts center. Listen until the end. No famous name. No dramatic title. No special effects. Just music." Within minutes, a few friends watched it. Then they shared it. Before midnight, hundreds of strangers had listened. Before sunrise, the number had quietly grown into thousands. Meanwhile, she slept peacefully, believing tomorrow would be exactly like every other day, never imagining that one quiet practice session was already beginning to change her life forever. The next morning began like every other morning. She woke before sunrise, made herself a simple cup of tea, watered the small plants sitting by her window, and opened the curtains just enough to let the soft morning light into her apartment. Nothing felt unusual. She checked the weather, packed her lunch, gathered her notebook, and left for work with the same quiet routine she had followed for years. The neighborhood bookstore opened at 9. She unlocked the front door with another employee, switched on the lights, and began arranging the new books that had arrived the day before. She loved the peaceful feeling of being surrounded by stories. Every book carried someone's imagination, someone's memories, or someone's lessons. She often thought music and books had something in common. Both could reach people without asking permission. A regular customer entered just after opening. "You always know which book to recommend," the customer said with a smile. She laughed softly. "I just listen carefully." The customer nodded. "That makes all the difference." She thanked the customer and returned to organizing the shelves, never noticing that her own life was beginning to change outside the bookstore. Across town, the student who had recorded her practice woke up to dozens of notifications. The short video had already been shared hundreds of times overnight. Comments continued appearing every few seconds. "Who is she? This is one of the most emotional piano performances I've heard. I thought the piano sounded old, but somehow she made it beautiful. This deserves a much bigger audience. I listened 3 times already." The student stared at the screen in disbelief. "I only wanted people to hear beautiful music," the student whispered. By breakfast, the number of views had climbed into the thousands. By lunchtime, local music pages had reposted the video. People weren't talking about expensive instruments or perfect recording quality. They were talking about the feeling. Many viewers admitted they had started watching for only a few seconds but stayed until the final note. Some said the music reminded them of loved ones they had lost. Others said it gave them hope during difficult times. One person wrote, "You can hear years of quiet dedication in every note." Another commented, "Whoever she is, I hope she never stops playing." At the community arts center, the security guard arrived for his shift and immediately noticed people asking questions. "Is this where that piano video was recorded? Do you know the pianist? Does she teach here?" He smiled politely but respected her privacy. "I only know she's a regular visitor." He refused to say anything more. The cleaning worker also noticed the sudden attention. People who had never entered the building before now walked through its doors just to see the old practice room. The forgotten grand piano had unexpectedly become a topic of conversation. Several music teachers watched the video during their lunch break. One of them listened carefully without speaking. After the music ended, the teacher replayed it. Then again. Finally, another teacher asked, "What do you think?" The first teacher smiled. "She isn't trying to impress anyone. No, she's telling a story." That answer spread through the room. More teachers watched. More students listened. Even experienced musicians admitted there was something difficult to explain about her performance. It wasn't perfect in the technical sense. A few tiny imperfections remained. But somehow those small moments made it feel even more real. Nothing sounded forced. Nothing sounded rehearsed for applause. It sounded honest. That honesty touched people. Back at the bookstore, she spent the afternoon helping customers choose birthday gifts and novels for summer reading. A little boy walked toward the music section holding a beginner piano book. He looked uncertain. She smiled warmly. "Learning piano?" He nodded. "I'm afraid I'll make mistakes." She gently closed the book he was holding. Everyone makes mistakes. What if people laugh? She thought quietly for a moment before answering. If you stop because you're afraid, you'll never discover what you're capable of. The boy smiled. I'll keep trying. She watched him leave, never realizing she had just spoken the same advice she had spent years teaching herself. Late that afternoon, the bookstore owner walked toward the counter holding a phone. Have you seen this piano video? She looked up. No, I've been working. It's everywhere today. He showed her the screen, but before the video started, another customer needed assistance. I'll watch it later, she said. She returned to work without another thought. Meanwhile, the video continued spreading. A local radio station mentioned it during an afternoon program. One host said, "Sometimes the internet surprises us. Instead of arguments or bad news, today people are sharing a simple piano performance recorded inside a quiet community arts center." The other host replied, "Maybe that's exactly what people needed." By evening, several newspapers had written short online articles asking if anyone knew the identity of the mysterious pianist. The comments became filled with guesses. Some believed she was a retired concert performer. Others thought she must be a music professor. A few even guessed she was famous and simply practicing in secret. None of them knew the truth. She was simply finishing another normal workday. As she left the bookstore, she walked toward the bus stop while watching the sunset paint the sky with soft orange colors. She enjoyed moments like this. They reminded her that life moved quietly, even when people hurried around her. When she arrived at the Community Arts Center later that evening, she immediately noticed something different. Several unfamiliar people stood outside the entrance. Some carried cameras. Others held notebooks. The security guard looked relieved when he saw her. "There you are." She looked confused. "What's happening?" He smiled carefully. "I think you should come inside." She followed him into the hallway. The practice room door remained closed. Several staff members were gathered nearby. One of the music instructors stepped forward. "Was it really you?" She blinked. "I'm sorry. The pianist." She looked around, completely confused. "What pianist?" The instructor gently showed her the video. As soon as the first few notes began playing, her eyes widened. "Someone recorded me?" The student quickly stepped forward. "I'm really sorry. You recorded this?" "I stayed outside the room. I never wanted to invade your privacy. I only thought the music was too beautiful to disappear." She looked at the phone without saying a word. The instructor spoke gently. "Thousands of people have already heard it. Thousands. Actually, much more than that." She could hardly believe it. "I don't understand." The security guard smiled. "People needed hope." The cleaning worker nodded. "They found it in your music." She stood quietly. For years she had hidden from audiences. Now an audience had somehow found her without her even trying. She wasn't sure whether to smile or worry. "What if people expect too much from me?" The instructor answered honestly. "I don't think they're expecting perfection. They aren't. No. They're responding to sincerity." Those words stayed in her mind. Before she could say anything else, another visitor entered the building. The visitor introduced himself as the organizer of an upcoming charity concert that supported free music education for children. He had watched the video several times that afternoon. "I've been looking for you." She looked surprised. "For me?" "Yes. I don't perform. I know. I only practice." He smiled. "Sometimes practice reveals more than performance." She looked down. "I haven't been on a stage in years. I understand. I don't think I can." The organizer didn't pressure her. Instead, he handed her a simple envelope. Inside is an invitation. No deadlines. No pressure. Take your time. If your answer is no, I'll completely understand. She accepted the envelope with both hands. "Thank you. I'll think about it." He smiled kindly before leaving. The hallway became quiet again. Everyone returned to their work. She walked into the practice room alone. The old grand piano waited exactly where it always had. Nothing about it had changed. Yet somehow everything felt different. She sat down without opening the envelope. She rested her hands above the keys but didn't play. Instead, she looked at her reflection on the polished wood. For years she had believed her music belonged only inside empty rooms. Now strangers across the country had listened to it. Not because of advertisements. Not because of competitions. Simply because one quiet evening had touched people's hearts. She finally opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. It read, "Some music entertains people. Other music reminds them they are not alone. We believe yours does the second. If you are willing, we would be honored to have you perform at our charity concert." She read the note 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. The room remained silent. Outside, the evening breeze gently moved the trees. She closed her eyes. The fear from years ago still lived somewhere inside her. But for the first time in a very long time, another feeling appeared beside it. Hope. It was small. It was quiet. but it was finally beginning to sound louder than fear. The invitation stayed on her small kitchen table for 3 days. Every morning before leaving for work, she looked at the envelope for a few seconds. Every evening when she returned home, it was the first thing she noticed after unlocking the door. She never moved it. She never threw it away. She simply wasn't ready to answer. The words inside kept returning to her mind. Some music entertains people. Other music reminds them they are not alone. She wanted to believe those words, but another voice inside her always spoke louder. What if the first performance was only luck? What if people expect too much? What if I freeze again? Those questions followed her everywhere. At the bookstore, she tried to focus on arranging new arrivals, helping customers, and recommending novels. She smiled as usual, but those who knew her well could tell something was different. The bookstore owner noticed it first. "You've been thinking about something all week." She looked up from a stack of books. "Is it that obvious?" He smiled. "You've arranged the same shelf 3 times. She laughed softly. "I guess my mind is somewhere else." He didn't ask for details. Instead, he handed her a newly arrived book. The cover showed a mountain path disappearing into the clouds. "The writer says every journey begins with one difficult step." She smiled. "That sounds simple. It usually is. But taking the step isn't." His words stayed with her long after she returned to work. That evening she went to the community arts center as she always did. The building was busier than usual. Students walked through the hall carrying music folders. Parents waited outside classrooms. Some people quietly looked at her, recognizing her from the now famous video. She felt uncomfortable with the attention. She lowered her eyes and walked toward the practice room. The security guard greeted her warmly. "Good evening. Good evening. You still come even after becoming famous." She quickly shook her head. "I'm not famous." He laughed. "Tell that to the people asking about you every day." She smiled but changed the subject. "Is the practice room free? It always feels like it's waiting for you." She thanked him and stepped inside. The old grand piano stood in its familiar place. She gently touched the lid before sitting down. For several minutes she simply played scales and simple exercises. Music had always helped clear her thoughts. Tonight was no different. As she practiced, she heard a soft knock at the open door. An elderly man stood there with kind eyes and silver hair. He carried a small notebook under one arm. "I'm sorry to interrupt." She stopped playing. "It's all right. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." He smiled. "I've listened outside this room twice already." She looked slightly embarrassed. "I'm still practicing." "I know. I came because practice tells me more than performance." She looked curious. The elderly man stepped inside. "I used to teach piano here many years ago. I retired before most of the current students were born." She politely stood to greet him. "I've heard people mention you." He smiled. "I've heard people mention you as well." She didn't know what to say. He walked slowly around the piano. "This instrument isn't easy to play." "No. It demands honesty." She looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "A newer piano can sometimes hide small mistakes." He gently placed his hand on the wooden frame. "This one cannot. It reveals everything." She looked at the keys. "Maybe that's why I like it." The retired teacher smiled. "I think that's exactly why it likes you." She laughed quietly. "I've never thought of a piano liking someone." "They do. They respond differently depending on the person." She wasn't sure whether he was serious or simply speaking poetically. Either way, she enjoyed the conversation. The retired teacher sat in one of the nearby chairs. "I watched your video." She looked down. "I never expected anyone to see it." "I'm glad they did." "I'm not." He looked surprised. "You aren't." "I only wanted a quiet place to practice." He nodded slowly. "I understand. But life doesn't always ask permission before opening a new door." His words reminded her of the invitation still waiting at home. He noticed her expression. "Something is troubling you." She hesitated before answering. "I've been invited to perform." "That's wonderful." "It terrifies me." He remained silent for a moment. Then he asked gently, "Why do you play?" She answered almost immediately, "Because music makes me feel alive." "Not because people clap?" She shook her head. "No." "Not because you want recognition?" "No." "Then why should an audience change your reason for playing?" She stared quietly at the keyboard. She had never thought about it that way. The retired teacher continued. "When you were alone in this room, you weren't trying to prove anything. No. You simply shared your heart. Yes. Do exactly the same on stage." She smiled faintly. "It sounds easy." "No. It isn't. But it is possible." Before leaving, he handed her a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this many years ago for one of my students." She unfolded it. Only one sentence was written. "People remember how music makes them feel far longer than they remember perfect notes." She carefully folded the paper again. "Thank you. I'll keep this." He smiled warmly before walking toward the door. "Oh, one more thing." She looked up. "Don't spend your life hiding from one difficult day." Then he quietly left. His words echoed in the room long after he disappeared down the hallway. That night she played longer than usual. Not because she wanted to become faster. Not because she wanted to impress anyone. She simply wanted to understand herself. Over the next week, something began changing. She accepted that people recognized her. Children smiled when they saw her entering the art center. Some asked for simple advice. Others simply thanked her for the video. One little girl waited outside the practice room holding a notebook. "Excuse me," she smiled. "Yes. I started practicing again because of you." Her eyes widened. "Really?" The girl nodded. "I almost quit. But when I saw your video, I thought maybe getting better just takes time." She felt tears forming. She gently knelt so they could speak face to face. "Never compare your beginning with someone else's years of practice." The little girl smiled brightly. "I won't." She walked away happily. The simple conversation stayed in her heart all evening. Later that night, while closing the bookstore, the owner spoke again. "I watched your performance." She looked surprised. "You recognized me?" "I recognized your kindness before I recognized your face." She laughed. "What does that mean?" "You help people here every day without expecting anything." "I wasn't surprised your music sounded the same." She smiled quietly. "You really think I should accept the invitation?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he locked the front door and turned off the lights. Then he said, "Imagine yourself 10 years from now." She listened carefully. "Which would you regret more? Trying and making mistakes? Or never trying at all?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Deep inside, she already knew. That weekend, she returned home after another practice session. The invitation still rested on the kitchen table. This time, she picked it up immediately. She looked at the concert date. Only 3 weeks remained. Her hands trembled slightly. She reached for her phone. She stared at the organizer's number for nearly 5 minutes. Then she slowly pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a warm voice answered. "Hello." She took a deep breath. "This is the pianist you invited." There was a brief silence. Then came a cheerful reply. "I'm very glad you called." She smiled nervously. "I've been thinking. And I still feel afraid." "That's completely normal." She laughed softly. "I was hoping you'd say something different." He laughed too. "Everyone feels afraid before something important." She looked out the window at the quiet evening sky. "I don't know if I'll be perfect." "We're not looking for perfect." "I don't even know if I'll finish without making mistakes." "We're not counting mistakes." She closed her eyes. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled every thought. Finally, she spoke the words that would change everything. "I'll do it." There was a short silence before the organizer answered. "I promise you one thing." "What is it?" "You won't stand on that stage alone." After ending the call, she placed the phone on the table. Her heart was beating faster than it had in years. She wasn't certain what the coming weeks would bring. She only knew one thing. For the first time since that painful performance long ago, she had chosen courage instead of fear. And although she didn't realize it yet, that single decision would soon inspire far more people than the music itself ever could. The 3 weeks before the charity concert passed faster than she expected. Every day followed the same pattern. She worked at the bookstore during the day and practiced at the community arts center every evening. Her schedule became busy, but she never complained. She had waited years for the courage to stand on a stage again, and she wanted to honor the opportunity by preparing with patience instead of pressure. She chose a piece that had been close to her heart for a long time. It was not the most difficult composition she had ever learned, and it was not written to show speed or flashy technique. Instead, it carried a quiet story. It began gently, almost like someone speaking in a whisper, then slowly grew stronger before returning to peace again. Every note reminded her that life could be difficult, but hope always had a way of returning. The retired piano teacher visited her practice room several times during those weeks. He never interrupted her. He simply listened until she finished. One evening he smiled and asked, "How many times have you played this piece now?" She laughed. "I stopped counting after 50. He nodded. "Good." She looked confused. "I thought you would tell me to practice more." He shook his head. "You already know the notes." "I do. The question is no longer whether your fingers remember." She looked at the keyboard. "Then what should I practice?" He smiled kindly. "Practice trusting yourself." She remained silent for a moment. "That feels much harder." "It always is." His words stayed with her. From that day forward, she spent less time worrying about mistakes and more time thinking about the meaning behind every phrase of the music. She imagined every note carrying comfort to someone sitting in the audience. Instead of trying to impress people, she focused on telling a story through the piano. The charity concert was organized to raise money for free music lessons for children whose families could not afford them. The organizer believed every child deserved a chance to discover music, no matter where they came from. As news of the event spread, more tickets were requested than anyone expected. Some people wanted to support the cause. Others hoped to hear the mysterious pianist whose practice video had touched so many hearts. She tried not to think about that. Every time she imagined a full audience, her heartbeat became faster. A few days before the concert, she visited the concert hall for the first rehearsal. It was much larger than the practice room she knew so well. Rows upon rows of empty seats stretched toward the back of the hall. Bright stage lights hung high above. The grand piano waiting at center stage looked beautiful under the soft lighting. She slowly walked toward it. For a few seconds, memories returned. Years ago, another stage, another audience, another performance that had ended with silence instead of music. She closed her eyes. Her hands became cold. She almost turned around. Before fear could grow stronger, the organizer quietly walked beside her. "You don't have to play yet," he said gently. She looked at him. "I thought I was ready." "You are. It doesn't feel like it." He smiled. "Being ready doesn't mean you're never nervous." She took a slow breath. "What if my hands shake?" "They probably will." "What if I make mistakes?" "Everyone does." "What if people are disappointed?" He looked around the empty hall. "The people coming here aren't expecting perfection. They're coming because your music gave them hope." She stood quietly. Then she walked toward the piano. She sat down. Instead of beginning with the difficult sections, she played only a few simple notes. The sound filled the large hall. It felt different from the small practice room. Bigger, warmer, more open. She continued playing. Little by little, the fear faded. By the time she reached the final note, she was smiling. The organizer applauded softly. "There you are." She looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I've been waiting for that smile." She laughed quietly. "So have I." The night before the concert, she barely slept. She wasn't afraid of forgetting the music anymore. She was thinking about the people who would be listening. She wondered what stories they carried. She wondered if anyone in the audience was struggling with fear the way she once had. She hoped the music would remind them not to give up. The morning of the concert arrived with bright sunshine. She went for a short walk before breakfast. The fresh air helped calm her thoughts. Children played in a nearby park. Birds rested on tree branches. Life continued peacefully, even though her own heart felt like it was racing. Later that afternoon, she arrived at the concert hall earlier than anyone expected. The backstage area was already busy. Volunteers arranged programs on tables. Technicians adjusted microphones and lights. Musicians quietly warmed up in separate rooms. Despite all the activity, everyone treated one another with kindness. The organizer welcomed her with a smile. "I'm glad you're here. I didn't want to be late." He handed her a small bottle of water. "You have about an hour before the audience enters." She nodded. Instead of sitting backstage, she quietly walked onto the empty stage one last time. She looked across the silent hall. Thousands of empty seats waited. She imagined them filled with ordinary people. Parents, grandparents, students, teachers, workers finishing long days, people carrying joys, people carrying pain. She realized they were not strangers. They were simply people just like her. That thought made her feel calmer. The retired piano teacher found her standing there. "You came to meet the room before it filled." She smiled. "I wanted to remember that it's only a place." He nodded. "Exactly. The people inside matter much more than the building." He handed her the folded paper he had given her weeks earlier. "You kept it. I made another copy." She read the sentence once again. People remember how music makes them feel far longer than they remember perfect notes. She folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. Soon the audience began arriving. Families found their seats. Children looked excited. Older couples smiled while reading the concert program. Some recognized her photograph beside the performance list. Others had never seen her before. They only knew they had heard wonderful things about the final performance of the evening. Backstage, she listened as the first performers took the stage. A children's choir sang beautifully. A small string group performed next. Young piano students each played short pieces. The audience applauded warmly after every performance. As the evening continued, her turn slowly came closer. Her hands became colder. She quietly stretched her fingers. The organizer noticed. "Nervous?" She laughed. "Very. That's all right. What if the fear returns?" He smiled. "Then play anyway." Those 3 words settled deeply in her heart. Play anyway. A volunteer approached. "They're ready for you." She stood slowly. For a brief moment, she thought about turning back. Then she remembered the little boy at the bookstore who had been afraid of making mistakes. She remembered the young girl who had started practicing again because of the video. She remembered the cleaning worker who said beautiful music could say what people could not. She remembered the security guard who told her she had been inside the music. She remembered every quiet evening spent practicing alone when nobody was watching. Those evenings had brought her here. She took one deep breath. Then she walked toward the stage. The announcer introduced her with only a few simple words. Our final performer reminds us that quiet dedication can sometimes touch more hearts than loud applause. The audience welcomed her with gentle applause. She stepped into the light. For just a second, the brightness made it difficult to see the people beyond the first few rows. Then her eyes adjusted. Hundreds of faces looked toward her. Not with judgment, not with impatience, with kindness. She slowly walked to the piano. Every step felt lighter than the one before. She sat on the bench. She adjusted the distance. She rested both hands gently above the keys. The hall became completely silent. She closed her eyes for one slow breath, exactly as she always did in the little practice room. For a brief moment, the large concert hall disappeared. In her heart, she was back beside the old piano she had loved for years. She opened her eyes. Her fingers touched the first key. A single gentle note floated through the hall. Then another followed. The quiet melody began to grow, filling every corner of the room with warmth. Within moments, the audience stopped thinking about the stage, the lights, or the performer. They simply listened. And for the first time in many years, she was no longer playing against her fear. She was playing beyond it. The first notes drifted gently through the concert hall, and the audience became completely still. No one reached for a phone. No one whispered to the person beside them. It was as if every person in the room had silently agreed to give the music their full attention. She forgot about the bright lights above her. She forgot about the hundreds of people sitting in front of her. She forgot about the fear that had followed her for so many years. There was only the piano. Her fingers moved naturally across the keys. Every note flowed into the next without feeling rushed. She wasn't trying to prove she was the best pianist in the room. She simply wanted to tell a story that words could never fully explain. The melody began softly, like the beginning of a peaceful morning. Then it slowly grew stronger, carrying moments of hope, sadness, courage, and joy. Every change in the music felt honest because it reflected parts of her own journey. People in the audience listened with quiet expressions. An elderly couple held each other's hands. A young mother gently rested her hand on her little son's shoulder. Several music students leaned forward in their seats, watching every movement of her hands. The organizer stood quietly near the side of the stage. He smiled without saying a word. He knew something special was happening. The retired piano teacher remained seated near the front. His eyes never left the stage. He wasn't studying her technique anymore. He was simply enjoying the music. Halfway through the performance, something unexpected happened. One small note came out slightly differently than she had planned. Years ago, that tiny mistake would have filled her with panic. Years ago, she would have frozen. But not today. She continued playing without hesitation. The audience never noticed. The music kept flowing naturally, almost as if the mistake had always belonged there. At that moment, she understood something important. Perfection had never been her greatest goal. Connection was. That realization made her feel lighter than she had felt in years. She smiled gently while continuing to play. The audience noticed the smile. It made the performance feel even more personal. When she reached the final section, the melody became quieter again. Every note carried peace. Every pause allowed people to breathe. The last chord echoed softly through the hall before fading into complete silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that appears when people are deeply moved. Then someone slowly began clapping. Another person joined. Then another. Within moments, the entire hall rose to its feet. The applause filled every corner of the building. She looked up in surprise. She had never expected such a response. Her eyes filled with tears. Not because people were applauding, but because she had finally finished a performance without fear controlling her. She stood and bowed with quiet gratitude. The applause continued. Some people wiped away tears. Others smiled warmly at one another. The retired piano teacher stood proudly. The security guard from the community arts center applauded harder than anyone else. The cleaning worker smiled through happy tears. The little girl who had started practicing again after watching the video clapped excitedly beside her parents. The organizer walked onto the stage after the applause slowly became quieter. He shook her hand. "Thank you." She smiled. "For what?" "For reminding everyone why music matters." She didn't know how to answer. She simply nodded. After the concert ended, many people gathered in the lobby. Some wanted photographs. Others simply wanted to thank her. She patiently greeted everyone. An elderly woman stepped forward first. "I lost my husband last year." She paused for a moment. "Tonight, your music brought back happy memories instead of sad ones." The woman smiled through tears. "I haven't smiled like this in a long time." She gently held the woman's hands. "Thank you for telling me." Another visitor approached. A young man said, "I've been thinking about giving up piano." She looked surprised. "Why?" "I felt like I would never be good enough." He smiled softly. "But after hearing you tonight, I remembered why I started learning." She answered quietly. "Never let comparisons steal your love for music." He nodded. "I won't." As more people shared their stories, she realized something beautiful. No two people had heard exactly the same performance. Each person had connected with a different memory, a different emotion, a different hope. That was the true power of music. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, she returned to the empty stage one last time. The lights were dim. The hall was silent again. She sat at the piano without saying a word. She played only a few simple notes. No audience. No applause. Just music. The organizer quietly entered from backstage. "I thought I'd find you here." She laughed softly. "This feels familiar." He nodded. "I wanted to thank you again." "You already did." "I know. But there's something else." He handed her a folder. Inside were letters written by people who had attended the concert. She looked surprised. "They wrote these tonight?" "Many stayed after the performance. They wanted you to know what your music meant to them." She carefully opened the first letter. Came from a father. He wrote that his daughter had stopped practicing piano months earlier because she believed she wasn't talented enough. After watching the performance, she asked him if they could start practicing together again. She smiled. She opened another letter. It came from a retired teacher who wrote that the performance reminded him why encouraging students mattered more than judging them. Another letter came from a hospital nurse who said the music gave her peace after many difficult weeks at work. She continued reading until her eyes filled with tears again. "I never imagined this." The organizer smiled. Neither did they. The following morning newspapers, television stations, and local websites shared stories about the concert. Most articles focused on her inspiring journey rather than fame. Headlines described a quiet woman who had spent years practicing alone before finally finding the courage to return to the stage. People appreciated the honesty of her story. Messages continued arriving every day. Schools invited her to speak with music students. Community centers asked if she would perform at charity events. Families thanked her for encouraging their children. She accepted only a few invitations. She wanted to stay true to herself. She continued working at the bookstore because she genuinely enjoyed it. Customers often smiled when they recognized her. One afternoon, the little boy who had once worried about making mistakes returned. He proudly carried another piano book. "You remembered me?" he asked. She smiled immediately. "Of course. I played in my first school recital." "How did it go?" "I made 2 mistakes." She nodded. "And then, I kept going." She laughed happily. "That's wonderful. My teacher said I looked confident." He smiled proudly. "I wasn't. I just remembered what you told me." She looked at him kindly. "What was that?" He answered without hesitation. "If I stop because I'm afraid, I'll never discover what I'm capable of." She felt deeply moved. Sometimes people remembered our smallest words more than we realized. That evening she returned once again to the community arts center. The old grand piano waited quietly in the familiar practice room. Nothing about it had changed. The scratches were still there. The wooden surface still showed its age. But now people walked past the room with new appreciation. Many students had started using that piano again. Not because it was the newest, because they believed beautiful music could come from unexpected places. The security guard smiled as she entered. "Busy week," she laughed. "Very busy. Too busy to practice?" She looked at the piano. "Never." He smiled. "I thought you might say that." She sat at the bench and rested her hands above the keys. The applause from the concert was already becoming a memory. The interviews would eventually end. The attention would slowly fade. But one thing would always remain: her love for music. She gently pressed the first key. The familiar sound filled the quiet room. She smiled to herself. Everything that had happened after the concert was wonderful. But this simple moment still felt like home. Because before anyone believed in her, before the audience stood to applaud, before thousands of strangers heard her music, there had only been one person quietly sitting in this room every evening, refusing to give up on a dream that everyone else believed had already ended. And deep in her heart, she knew that quiet determination would always be the greatest success she had ever achieved. Several months passed after the charity concert, but life did not become loud or complicated. In many ways, it became even more meaningful. The interviews slowly became fewer. News stories moved on to other topics. The excitement on social media settled down. Yet something much more important remained. The people whose lives had been touched by her music continued to remember that evening. She was happy about that. She had never wanted to become famous. She had only wanted to play honestly. Every morning she still walked to the neighborhood bookstore with the same warm smile. She greeted regular customers by name, helped children find books they enjoyed, and recommended novels to people looking for a quiet weekend read. Many visitors recognized her now, but they also respected her wish to live a simple life. One afternoon, an elderly customer placed a novel on the counter and smiled. "I attended your concert." She smiled back. "Thank you for coming. I've watched many performances in my life." The customer paused. "But yours stayed with me." She looked surprised. "It wasn't because you played perfectly." She laughed softly. "I'm glad. It was because you reminded everyone that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they don't give up." She quietly thanked the customer before wrapping the book. Those words stayed with her for the rest of the day. After work, she continued visiting the community arts center almost every evening. The old grand piano waited exactly where it always had. The scratches were still there. The wooden bench still made the same small sound whenever someone sat down. The room still felt peaceful. She loved that nothing about it had changed. One evening she noticed several children standing outside the practice room. They looked nervous. One little boy stepped forward. "Excuse me." She smiled kindly. "Yes. We heard you're practicing." "I am. Can we listen?" She looked at the group. There were 6 children. Some carried beginner piano books. Others simply looked curious. She smiled. "Come in." The children quietly entered and sat in the back of the room. Instead of playing difficult music, she chose a simple melody that beginners could easily understand. When she finished, the children clapped happily. One little girl raised her hand. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." "Were you always this good?" She smiled. "No. Really. I was once slower than all my classmates." The children looked surprised. "I made mistakes every day." Another child asked, "Then why didn't you quit?" She thought carefully before answering. "Because every mistake taught me something." The children nodded. She realized that many young learners believed talented people were born confident. They rarely saw the years of quiet practice hidden behind every success. That evening she stayed longer than usual, answering questions and encouraging every child to keep learning. The retired piano teacher quietly watched from the hallway. When the children finally left, he smiled. "You've become a teacher without realizing it." She laughed. "I don't think I'm ready to teach." He shook his head. "You already are." She looked confused. "Teaching isn't only about giving lessons. It's about giving courage." His words warmed her heart. Soon afterward, the Community Arts Center asked whether she would be willing to lead free weekend piano classes for children whose families could not afford private lessons. She accepted immediately. The first Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine. She expected only a handful of students. Instead, more than 20 children entered the classroom. Some had never touched a piano before. Others already knew a few simple songs. One child looked frightened. Another couldn't stop smiling. One little boy quietly admitted, "I don't think I'm talented." She gently sat beside him. "Can I tell you a secret?" He nodded. "I used to believe the same thing." He looked surprised. "You did?" "Yes." "So what changed?" "I stopped asking whether I was talented." "What did you ask instead?" "I asked whether I was willing to keep learning." The boy smiled. "I think I can do that." Week after week, the classes became more popular. Parents often waited outside the room while their children practiced. Many said their sons and daughters looked happier since joining the lessons. Some children became close friends through music. Others slowly gained confidence in school because they were no longer afraid of making mistakes. She noticed something beautiful. The children celebrated one another's progress instead of competing. Whenever someone learned a new song, everyone applauded. Whenever someone struggled, another student offered encouragement. The room became filled with kindness. One afternoon, the organizer of the charity concert, visited during a lesson. He quietly watched from the doorway. After class ended, he smiled. "I hoped your concert would inspire people." She laughed. "I didn't expect this." He looked around the classroom. "Neither did I." The walls were covered with drawings made by the children. Some had drawn pianos. Others had drawn musical notes. One picture showed an old grand piano with bright flowers growing around it. At the bottom, a child had written, "Music grows when people share it." She stood quietly looking at the drawing. Sometimes children understood life better than adults. Months later, the Community Arts Center announced wonderful news. The old grand piano would be completely restored. Local businesses and concert guests had donated enough money after the charity event to repair the instrument. Everyone celebrated. When the restoration was finished, the piano looked beautiful. The scratches had been carefully repaired. The wood shined again. The keys felt smoother beneath her fingers. But one small detail remained unchanged. Near the inside edge of the piano, a tiny mark that had always reminded her of its long history was left untouched. The craftsman explained why. "Some memories should remain." She smiled. "I agree." During a small celebration, the director of the Arts Center spoke to everyone gathered in the hall. This piano spent years being ignored. He looked toward the instrument. Today it represents hope. He invited her to say a few words. She slowly walked to the front. The room became quiet. She wasn't used to giving speeches. She looked at the children sitting in the front row. Then she smiled. "When I first came here, I believed nobody noticed this piano." She gently placed her hand on the polished wood. "I also believed nobody noticed me." Several people smiled. "I was wrong." She paused. "The truth is that many wonderful things grow quietly. A tree doesn't become tall overnight. A song isn't learned in one day. Confidence doesn't appear all at once. It grows one small step at a time." The children listened carefully. "If you make mistakes," she smiled, "keep playing. If you feel afraid, keep learning. If someone tells you your dream is too small, keep believing." She looked around the room. "The greatest gift music has given me wasn't applause. It was the chance to meet all of you." The audience stood and applauded warmly. This time the applause felt different. It wasn't celebrating a performance. It was celebrating a journey. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, she stayed behind. The hallway was quiet once again. The security guard smiled as he passed. "Looks familiar, doesn't it?" She looked around the peaceful building. "It feels exactly like the first night." He nodded. "Except one thing." "What?" "The room isn't empty anymore." She smiled. He was right. Even after everyone had left, laughter, encouragement, and music seemed to remain inside the walls. She entered the practice room alone. The restored grand piano stood waiting. She sat on the familiar bench. She closed her eyes. She took the same slow breath she had taken hundreds of evenings before. Nothing about that small habit had changed. She placed her fingers gently above the keys. Before playing, she remembered the frightened young woman who had once hidden inside this room because she feared another public performance. She remembered the rainy evening when someone quietly recorded her practice. She remembered the unexpected invitation. She remembered the concert. She remembered the standing ovation. She remembered every child who had smiled during her classes. Then she realized something important. The hidden power everyone talked about had never been extraordinary talent. It had never been perfect technique. It had never been fame. Her true strength had always been something much simpler. She never stopped showing up. Even when nobody was watching. Even when nobody applauded. Even when she doubted herself. She kept returning to the piano. Again and again. She finally pressed the first key. A gentle note filled the quiet room. Then another. Soon the familiar melody floated through the hallway, just as it had on that rainy evening months before. Only this time the music carried something new. Not fear. Not sadness. Not uncertainty. Carried gratitude. Outside the practice room, A few students walking past quietly stopped to listen. They smiled at one another without saying a word. The music once again filled the old community arts center with warmth. And as the final notes softly echoed into the peaceful evening, everyone who heard them understood the same simple truth. Sometimes the greatest power in a person is not found in the moment the world finally notices them. It is found in all the quiet days when they choose to keep believing in themselves, keep working with patience, and keep sharing kindness long before anyone is watching.